What childhood memory suddenly made sense years later? When I was around 7 years old, there was this one night that stuck with me for years. A night that I thought was just a strange, confusing blur until I was much older and finally understood what had actually happened. It was a Saturday evening. I remember because Saturday nights were special in our house. My mom would let us stay up a little later, and we'd usually have popcorn and watch a family movie together in the living room. That night, though, everything felt different. My dad seemed tense, pacing back and forth while my mom kept glancing out the front window. At the time, I thought they were just waiting for someone to visit. I even asked, "Who are we waiting for?" But my mom brushed me off with a tight smile and said, "Don't worry, honey. Go get your pajamas on." So I did. When I came back, the popcorn was still on the table, but the TV wasn't on. Instead, my parents were whispering in the kitchen, and my dad kept checking the clock. My younger brother was already half asleep on the couch, clutching his blanket. Then came the knock. Loud, heavy. It made me jump. My mom immediately told me and my brother to go upstairs and stay in your rooms. Her voice had this sharp edge to it that made me obey without question. I remember peeking over the banister as she opened the door just a crack. There was a man standing there. I couldn't see his face, only his silhouette against the porch light, but his voice was low and rough. He said something like, "We just need to talk." My dad stepped in front of my mom then, blocking my view, and the two of them stepped outside. The door closed behind them. What I remember most vividly is the silence that followed. My mom had always said, "Don't eavesdrop," but I couldn't help it. I pressed my ear to the floor vent upstairs, one of those old vents that carried sound between the levels. I could hear muffled voices, but not the words. My heart pounded in my chest, because even as a little kid, I knew this wasn't normal. After a while, the door opened again. My dad came back in, face pale, jaw tight. He didn't say a word, just locked the door behind him and pulled all the blinds shut. My mom looked shaken, but she gave me this smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Everything's fine. Let's go to bed." And that was it. No movie, no popcorn. Just everyone going to bed early, like nothing had happened. For years, I couldn't make sense of that night. I asked about it a few times growing up, but my parents would always brush it off. "You dreamed that," or "You misremembered, sweetheart." I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe it was just some childhood exaggeration. But then, when I was in college, the truth came out. One night, I was home visiting, and my dad and I were sitting on the porch. He had a couple beers in him, and we were talking about family memories. Out of nowhere, I brought up that night. "Dad," I said, "do you remember when that man came to the door and you told us to go upstairs? What was that about?" He went completely still. For a moment, I thought he was going to deny it again. But then he sighed, rubbed his face, and said, "You remember that, huh?" And then he told me the truth. Apparently, years earlier, my dad had loaned money to a family friend, a guy he knew from work who'd fallen on hard times. My dad, being the kind of person who always wanted to help, gave him more than he probably should have. But that man had connections, bad ones. Long story short, the guy got mixed up in some shady business, and one of his associates decided that my dad owed them. The man who showed up at our door that night wasn't just some visitor. He was there to threaten my dad, to intimidate him into paying money he didn't actually owe. My mom had been terrified, and my dad was doing his best to stand his ground while also keeping us kids out of it. He never told us the details because he didn't want us to be afraid. He handled it quietly, eventually getting some help from a friend who had connections of his own, not dangerous ones, just someone who could make sure we weren't bothered again. But when he told me that, suddenly everything clicked. My mom's nervous glances out the window, my dad pacing, checking the time, the way they shut down our normal Saturday night routine, the locked doors, the blinds drawn tight, and most of all, the fear I could feel in the air, even as a child who didn't understand what was happening. That memory had haunted me for years because it didn't make sense. Why was my mom so scared? Why did my dad step outside with a stranger? Why did the fun stop so abruptly that night? And why did they both act like it never happened afterward? As an adult, it all added up. My parents weren't trying to confuse me. They were trying to protect me, to make sure I didn't have to carry the weight of something dark and dangerous at such a young age. Looking back now, I realize that was probably one of the scariest nights of their lives too, but they carried it so that I wouldn't have to. And it's only years later that I finally understand just how much they shielded me from things I wasn't ready to face. That childhood memory, once just a strange, unsettling fragment, suddenly made sense in the clearest, most sobering way.